right, welcome back to the So There I Was podcast. I'm your host again, Travis Womack. Today's guest is kind of a unique guest in of himself, but it's Shawn Campbell. Shawn was is a retired Air Force / Space Force. We'll get into that. That's why it's unique. It's a first dual branch person of any sort, and also the first Space Force. So, Shawn, welcome to the show.
Thanks. It's great to be here, Travis. I appreciate you having me on.
So, kind of a little background for both of us here is that we our careers overlapped a little bit. We were just talking about the Pentagon there for a little while, and kind of the creation of Space Force, and then kind of COVID going on, and let's love to chat about the building, as we call it,
Sure.
and just kind of some of the uniqueness of that and everything. But let's kind of walk about what I like to do is have everybody kind of just give a little career summary, however
Yeah.
short or long it is, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. Great. I appreciate that. So I joined the Air Force back in 1993. I was a junior in college and I was looking for a way to finish paying for school. So, like yourself, I was an enlisted member first, and then I completed school and then went off to officer training school about 2.5 years later. And then I had a career that I did not expect. I was going to do my required service time, and I was gonna get out about the 8-year point. We were living in Germany. Both my kids were born at that point. I didn't have any service commitments left, and I thought that at the end of this tour, we're going to move home to the Virginia Beach, Norfolk area, Virginia, and be back home. And here we are, 30 years later. I retired actually just 6 months ago, and I happened to be, as I shared with you before we came on, I happened to be back up from the Virginia Beach area in DC, and had a little bit of butterfly as I was driving up 95 yesterday and got on 395, and I was, oh, am I going to the Pentagon? No, I'm going to my hotel for my post Air Force deployment work. And so I had that moment about the building. 30 years in uniform, and I spent 9 years in the Pentagon over 3 assignments. So it is the place that I spent more time in my career than anywhere else. As you know, it's a fascinating place to be and to work. And yes, it can be intense to be there. I wish more people could see it, but
Yeah,
obviously after 9/11, 2001, when the security posture changed, it's not as open as it once was. So it's harder to get people in. But I mean, it's like a museum. It's like one of the
yeah.
Smithsonian's to go through. But long and short is I had a very unexpected career, did not intend to stay as long as I did. I never thought that I would become a flag officer. That was not in my thinking pattern, but the Air Force was a great place for me to have a life and a career. It's been very good to my family and me, and there's really not much I would trade over all of those years. A few things I would not have done the way I did them,
Yeah.
but I would choose that life again.
That's
Absolutely.
that's very common. I hear all the time for any of us that do. I think anything be over 10 is kind of the cutoff I've noticed is like, I never intended this, insert
Mhm.
time period. And it's a very
Yeah.
common thing. Like you get to that. And I noticed that with the E6s and in most branches as well, it's kind of that 8 to 12 year
Mhm.
window where I see a lot of people get out. I'm like, you're so close. I mean, not as
Right.
the new retirement, how that, you know,
Sure.
the blended thing changes and all that, but us that were in the 20-year plans, it's still like you're right there. What happened? And he's like,
Right.
well, I gotta go. And I'm like, it's 8 more years. That's 2 assignments and you're done. So
Absolutely. Yeah. In fact, my second assignment in the Pentagon, I was at about the 18-year point when I was leaving to go to senior service school, and I contemplated not going to school and just finishing out my remaining 2 years and just retiring right at 20. And I remember calling my wife, and I said, honey, we have this opportunity. This was when you were still able to do the 9/11 GI Bill transfer to the children. And I started
yeah,
thinking about it. I thought, yeah, this is probably a really smart way to use that GI Bill that I earned all those years ago that I'll probably never use.
yeah,
Let's transfer to the kids. And we have 2 children, so it was kind of perfect alignment to split it between the
yeah,
two
yeah,
of them very evenly. And she said, "Oh, yeah, that sounds good." And I said, "But you do realize that if we do that, it's a 3-year commitment. As soon as I hit the form, go. And as a practical matter, it's going to be at least another 7 years because I understand how this whole thing works. probably get promoted again. And by the time, you
Three
get to
more
that
top
rank and you
three.
have 3 years
Yep.
time and grade, we're going to be 25 years. And then 12 years went by. Suddenly it was 30 years, 2 months and 8 days, according to my 214. And
Who's counting?
it was time. It was time. It was time to retire.
Yeah.
But part of that was some of what we'll discuss in our time together today is the last 4.5 years of my service. I was living in Arlington, Virginia, in a studio apartment, and my family was down in Norfolk, 180 miles away.
Oh no.
And that's not a terribly uncommon story. At one point in time, the Air Force, at least the General Officer Corps, about 30% were geobadging. They were somewhere where their family was not.
Wow.
And for my wife and me, we met when we were 19. We've been married for 30 years come November. So we were certainly comfortable in our relationship and where we were going to go, but that's a drain on anyone. And
Oh yeah.
neither of us were really, again, I loved my Air Force. We had a great a great run, but we just weren't willing to do that anymore. It started to be a real toll on my wife, my family, and me. And as much as I love the Air Force, love the service, still want to be a participant in what we do in national defense, national security, the price was starting to be more than I wanted to pay.
Yeah.
And I
Fair.
don't say that with any shame. And I, talked to my boss about it. Said, look, I've paid at this bank for a long time, and the place has been very good to me. It's been very fair to me, but it is time for me to retire.
Yeah.
So there I was, and I retired, and it was a bittersweet day. Say goodbye
Yeah.
to all the tradition and the teammates and all of that, and then go on the other side. But as you have experienced yourself after you retired, life is actually really good out
Yeah.
there in the other side of this world. There's lots of opportunities, lots of
Yeah.
options, and people like us who've had that experience in the military with 8 years, 10 years, 30 years, we're in demand.
Yeah.
Private sector
Absolutely.
really does want us because of the values that we bring and the work ethic we have, and what many have come to appreciate is how well educated our men and women in the armed services are. Whether you're
Yeah.
enlisted, warrant officer, very well educated, and
Absolutely.
outside of some of the professional services like doctors, lawyers, that sort of thing, there is no demographic in the country that is as educated as men and women who wear our uniforms.
Absolutely. I used to argue that all the time when I was a recruiter.
Yeah.
And people, oh, the infantry, they're the dumbest guys out there. I'm like, I was like, we took our entire platoon of like 36 of us, went to all of our ASVAB scores and everything, GT scores.
Yep.
Our platoon average was 112.
Yeah.
There were two guys in our whole platoon that didn't have a 110, which is pretty rare, and
Yeah.
I was like, we were smart guys. Now I have a great picture that I love to look at. And it's like, in this picture is a bunch of junior enlisted goofballs,
Mm-hmm.
having a great time in Iraq. And then I can go through it and be like, there's 6 Green Berets that came out of this picture. There's
Right.
13 guys that finished Ranger School. There's a Delta operator. There's the 3 Corps Sergeant Major, and I'm like, you have 5 field grade officers. I'm like, it's just insane to kind of look at one picture and be like, no, they did all right, and I always argue that.
I think it's an unfortunate misnomer, whether it's politicians or pundits or whomever who poke fun at men and women in uniform. You've heard it over time. Some will say, not many, but there are some that will say things like, if you don't do well in school, you're going to wind up in the infantry, or you're going to wind up,
Right.
as a cook in the Air Force or what have you. And then you just aptly describe what they don't appreciate is that so many of those young men and women like you and me, we were just looking for opportunities to find
Right.
a way to the path that would lead us where we went. And it just happened to be that the military was a place that we could go do that.
Yeah.
And I argued this quite a bit when you and I were working on talent management initiatives in the building. Just that the biggest thing that people don't appreciate is that why we're having problem recruiting in places like the inner city in Baltimore isn't because there aren't really great, bright young men and women there. It's because our system doesn't allow us to get to them, because we make the wrong choice that if you take the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, it's exactly as it's described. it's an aptitude test, which
Yep.
evaluates what you know the day you take the test. It does not evaluate your propensity to learn.
Right.
And what we discovered when we were on the Army and Air Force side of the Talent Management Innovation and Task Force ledger was what the behavioral science tells us is the people who are most likely to succeed are the people that just need a chance. So if you have side by side two people who take the same ASVAB, one scores really well, one does not score so well. So we take the one who scores well because they're above the QT
Mm-hmm.
or entrance into the service. We leave that other person to the side. But if we evaluate their propensity to learn and then we connect them to an opportunity, two really interesting things happen. Number one, that young man or woman who scored lower on the aptitude battery actually outperforms, once you give them the opportunity to develop them, the person who scored higher.
Right.
There's any number of factors there, but that's generally what happens. And number two, that person who originally scored lower is much more apt to be retained.
Yeah.
Because you put value into that human being. And so I don't think we have a recruitment problem in the country. I don't say that sort of tongue in cheek.
No.
We're looking in the wrong places, and we set up conditions that don't allow us to actually tap into the talent that's all across our fruited plain. And so that's a lesson that I certainly learned inside the Pentagon, that it's okay for us to have this discussion. And then the general counsel gets involved and people get nervous on well, if you do that, are there biases in tests and things like that? Well, yes, and you have to sort through that. But let's not be afraid to tackle the things that are out there. And to your point about Delta operators and men and women who do really well, particularly the obviously mostly men that are in the special operational communities, you know this better than me. They're some of the brightest people you will ever
see.
meet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Just watch other podcasts. I forget what the guy's name is now. All those. What's the joke? What's the last course to be a Navy SEAL? And it's the how to write your book.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
yeah.
But they have that. I forget he's a bald guy, but he has a really great podcast where he interviews a lot of ex, special op guys and stuff, and every one of them, they have beards longer than mine, but they speak with a presence and authority and knowledge that it doesn't matter what special ops it is, but you're like, man, you have a master's degree in quantum physics. What the heck? What course is that? So I remember.
Well, I often tell people one of my classmates when I was doing senior service school is now Lieutenant General Chris Donahue.
Yeah.
Chris he's a brilliant guy, very quiet, very unassuming. Now he's a physical specimen. That dude he's definitely strong and fit and all that sort of stuff. But you would look at Chris and go, okay, well, he's sort of a pedestrian regular guy. And then sit down and have a conversation with General Donahue, and you're going to learn every single time that he speaks. And he speaks with authority. He does not waste a word, that sort of thing. And so just getting people to understand the nature of the men and women who wear the uniform and our civilians who serve. A lot of them are similarly suited. And so we make some really bad assumptions about people.
Yeah. There's some jokes, I think, that have gone on for probably 40, 50 years that have created a stigma and created a mindset of, Marines aren't intelligent, Armies is the next. And then, in Navies, Air Force is the smart people, and all those things, which because they only see the plain side of it. And it's like, yes, that's the special ops technically of the Air Force is, a very small part of the population. Yeah. You have to have a degree in like aeronautics or almost to do these things. And to fly a B-2 is not, the common man's job, but 90% of the Air Force is maintenance. So
there's a lot. Yeah. It's interesting for me. In fact, I was talking to some colleagues here today, and they asked what aircraft I flew. I said, well, I flew on a lot of aircraft, C-17, C-130. I had a fair amount of time in Black Hawk helicopters, but always in the back. I wasn't in the front flying the thing. Right. 80% of the officer corps in the Air Force does not. They're support personnel. They're maintainers. They do the other things. So it's helping, frame for people who haven't lived inside our communities to really understand the dynamics of the organization, which I think gets to some of what we were talking about as we were coming in and having this conversation around the misunderstanding about what happens with the human weapon system and the assumptions that the men and women who are suffering the most
Yeah.
are those that have direct combat experiences. And, I've been deployed a couple of times. I spent 3 years in Central Command. I was in and out of the AOR all the time. I often say it this way: the 35 months I was assigned to U.S. Central Command doing logistics, I spent an entire year on the road. I was on temporary duty 34 times in those 35 months. So you can sort of get the picture. Yeah. And my wife would say, it'd be so much easier if you would just be gone for 6 months at a time and then come home and then be gone for 6 months, as opposed to you come home for a week and then you're gone for another week, that sort of thing.
That's the worst. You said earlier, you mentioned about being GL Bachelor,
Yeah.
a couple hours away. And it's like, that's almost worse than, like, I'd rather be in Fiji, or not Fiji, but what's the,
well, I'd rather be in Fiji too. Yeah.
The Truman Show. It's as far as you can go before you start coming back.
Right. Yeah. Well, and it gets to this discussion where you spend a lot of time talking to people about how do you manage resilience, and how do you really handle the various things that come to us. And that being away from your family for extended periods of time is hard no matter where you are.
Yeah.
When you're downrange, there's a little bit of a difference because you're so mission focused. You get together with your squad, you go out, you do your mission, you do whatever it is that you're doing, and you're focused on that, and you're all in the same space. And I have found, you may have found the same. I mean, the times that I was deployed were some of the best times in the service. And not that the conditions were great or the other challenges that you face. And I never was engaged in combat. So I want to be clear to anyone listening that that's not the role that I had in my deployments. But you're still all there. You're on point. You're on mission, and the camaraderie that we all experience being in those environments together. If it's Tobacco Thursday, I hate cigars, but it was something to do because
right.
It was hanging out behind whatever tent or building, smoking cigars, because that was just something you did together.
Yeah, green bean coffee.
Yeah, exactly. A lot of green bean coffee for sure. But I had that experience where I leave the talent management work that we were collectively doing. I get the call to, this is January 20. I'm in the Dallas Fort Worth airport on my way out to the Air Force Academy for a couple of days. I don't recognize the number, but I know the exchange. So, okay, this is somebody calling from Washington, D.C. I probably should answer the phone. And the person on the other end of the phone was Pat Mulcahy, who's a retired Army colonel. It was in the AG personnel business, later became a senior executive service civilian. She was the first S1 for the brand new U.S. Space Force. And I had an occasion to brief her a couple of times on some of the talent management initiatives that we were collectively working on. And she asked me to come be her deputy and help her build the Space Force. I don't think I can say no. Now, honestly, and she knows this because I've had this conversation with her, where in my head, I was thinking, that sounds like an awful lot of work. And I don't know that I really want to do that. In my heart, though, I was thinking, as you sometimes do, kind of foolishly, like, how cool is that going to be?
Cool.
First new service, and at that time, 73 years, and this has never been done before, and this is going to be an amazing experience. And so naturally, that it was not a no. It was a let's make sure that the Air Force counterpart is okay with this. Which, I'm not an idiot. I knew she'd probably talked to him beforehand, and this was not a, are you interested? This was this is going to happen. I'm just letting you know.
Yeah, those are the best phone calls.
So I asked when she wanted me to start, and she said, well, so again, this is January 2020. She says, immediately. And so I can't, ma'am. I have these talent management initiatives. There's some things I need to get over the line before I rotate over, leave the Air Force. I never became a Guardian, but I joined what we called the first cadre in the Space Force. And So, I just have some things I need to finish up. So we kind of bartered through it. She she and I agreed to April 1 to start, and then March 2020 happened. And we had the COVID pandemic that spooked the entire planet. And then we went into things that now we can look back and say, well, we made some mistakes along the way, but we didn't know what we didn't know in those days. And so
Yeah.
Pentagon shuts down, and from being in the building, I mean, any given day, there's 25,000 humans in that place.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, we're told you can't have more than
Nobody.
5,000 people in the building.
Yeah.
And how dystopian that becomes. You have this amazing facility; it's enormous. You're in these office spaces where typically there's 100 more people, and you're the only human.
Yeah.
And so
So,
you have all of that compounding happening. At the same time, we're told we had spent a year as a Department of the Air Force and working with Department of Defense officials to build out a 5-year plan. We love our long-term plans,
oh
right,
yeah.
in the military. So we built a 5-year plan on how we were going to implement a new Space Force, because we had assumed that Congress was going to pass it into law, and that at the time President Trump was going to sign on to it. Of course, he did in December of 2019. So we're moving very fast. And we said, well, we have 5 years. We're gonna be okay. And then Congress came back and said, no, you have 18 months to get to initial operational capability. And I was person number 5 on the S1 staff. So it was my 3-star equivalent senior executive service boss, Pat Mulcahy, who's an amazing human being. Her chief, who was a space operator, so not somebody that had human resource experience or that sort of thing. And as amazing as Amber is, um, she was learning on the fly how to do some of that. It was the executive officer, who was a space operator himself, knew nothing about talent management or how you do any of the things we were about to undertake, our secretary, and then me. That's all we had in those early days. And so, we were a very lean and nimble staff, and it was similar across the rest of the staff function. It was a confab of a couple of dozen people who were, just for lack of a better term, borrowed and stolen from all of the branches of service.
Oh yeah.
Marines and sailors and soldiers and airmen and a number of civilians, and we're just thrown into this great big pot to go figure it out. Well, now COVID happens at the same time that you can't slow down.
Right.
And the Pentagon is a machine. It does
Yeah.
not stop.
Yeah.
And you have the pandemic going on. So now you're standing up the entire pandemic task force to deal with the enormous animal that is the Department of Defense. And you're still, right at the time, we were still doing operations in Afghanistan and
Yeah.
obviously other parts of the world, kinetics, and you're dealing with all the humanitarian relief, all the other things that we continue to do. So you just added 2 really complex things on top of everything else that we were all working. Build a new service, do so very quickly with no resourcing. And oh, by the way, now we have this pandemic that nobody really knows what's going on. So go figure these 2 things out simultaneously. It's a long-winded way to say we do what we always do. We put our ruck in hiking fashion and we go, right? It's like, okay,
Yeah.
I'm going to get my gear in order and we're going to go off and do the mission. And so that was the mentality that we all had. And then you very quickly realize, well, it's one thing when we're all in on a mission and we're just working it and we're jobbing it and we're getting
Mhm.
things done. We're knocking down targets. We're making progress. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward and 4 steps back.
Oh yeah.
But you're dealing with it. But now the pandemic happens. And all of the things that we talk about in those 4 pillars of resiliency, the social, the spiritual, the physical, the mental, every single one of those is attacked on all angles.
Mm-hmm.
You can't go work out because the gyms are all closed, including the Pentagon Athletic Center. So even if I wanted to go to the building to work out, I couldn't do it. The gym in my apartment building closed. Now you can still, go outside and run and things like that, but all of the other things that you think about that are part of your routine, I can't do that physical stuff.
Yep.
I'm a person of faith. My church was closed and they hadn't figured out Zoom yet. And so I couldn't even do that. So that I didn't have that really being fed. So that pillar of resiliency wasn't getting what it needed. As I shared in the opening, I'm living 180 miles away from my family. And I wasn't it wasn't that I didn't have opportunities that I could do some telework from where they were. It was still early. We were trying to figure out how to do that. Everything
Yeah.
was still just being done by cell phone. Microsoft Teams hadn't really
Oh, yeah.
figured out how to
That was
work
4 months
yet.
into it. Yeah.
Right. We were still trying to figure out, well, could we use Zoom? Well, you really can't because it doesn't have the right security
Secure. Yeah.
protocols. And so all of these things that we were all flailing about, and you're doing a lot of stuff on phones. So that interpersonal human contact that you have when you're in the office or you're in the garrison with your teammates, none of that was happening. So your social fabric is now also taken away. So all of your resilient pillars are starting to be undercut.
Yep.
And you add all of this additional stress on top of you. And when you and I started talking, I shared this story that, I mean, I reached a point where all of the things on which I relied for my health, physical health, spiritual health, mental health, all of them were negatively impacted. I wasn't potting together with my family for most of that time. And I reached a point in August of 2020, I was in a very, very dark place. I wasn't sleeping. My diet was an absolute disaster. Now that's, some personal choices that I was making. Uh, Physically, I think, we lovingly say the COVID 10 or 15 was a real thing because
Oh, yeah.
you weren't exercising as much and you're sequestered all the time. And what are you doing? You're eating and you're all of the things that you would typically do.
The munchies.
Yeah. So all of that's happening. It's just too easy when you're sitting 20 feet from your kitchen and you're on a call all day to just, well, I'll walk in here and make a snack. So all of those things are happening. I got to a point with the added pressure of trying to build out this new service, and at that point, we probably had 12 or 15 teammates on the human resource staff. So we were slightly larger, but we weren't slowing,
Yeah.
and we weren't knocking down targets at a quicker pace. We were actually decelerating because more and more stuff was being lumped on top of us. So our actual pace was slowed by the burden that was being put on us. So you're not sleeping, you're not eating well, you're not exercising, you're not taking care of all those different resilient pillars, you're not with the people that you love the most that you want to be around during a trying traumatic period like this. I was never suicidal. I want to be very clear about that. I never had any thoughts about that, but I was not in a great place.
Yeah.
And I was working in an area where inside the Pentagon, I couldn't have my cell phone with me. So I would go out when I could and just check to see if my wife had texted and that sort of thing. And so she was asking me a couple of things, and I wrote her an inordinately long text in response, which is something I don't really do a whole lot of. I text, but I'm not one of those serial texters, right? Where you're going to get paragraphs from me. I just don't. That's not me. Right. And she knew something was wrong. Yeah. She knew, just, again, we've been together since we were 19.
This is an 8-line text. Something's wrong.
Yeah, she knew something was wrong. And so she texted back and said, when you leave the building, and my apartment was a mile from the building, and because mass transit was not running the way that normally would have, I was just walking back and forth to work. Made sense. She said, please text me when you leave the building and you're walking back to the apartment tonight. This was a Friday night. So, okay, obviously, yeah, I'll do that. So it occurs to me as I walk out corridor 2 and I'm going across South Parking and heading up towards the Air Force Memorial. My apartment was right past that. It occurred to me she wasn't being responsive to the texts. It's probably because she was driving. So I called her cell phone. She didn't pick up. I called my house. My son picked up. I said, hey, where's mom? Oh, she's been out for a couple of hours running errands. Well, I'm doing the math in my head. I know how long it takes to drive 180 miles between, Norfolk and Arlington, Virginia. And I was doing okay, when did she last text me? It's like, well, she's probably very close to Arlington at this point.
Yeah.
So I finally get her on the phone and I just asked her, I said, how far are you from my apartment? She said, 5 minutes. I said, okay.
It's a good wife. Keep her.
She's amazing. And I mean, she knew that I was in a bad place. And to make matters worse, on Sunday, I was leaving to go to Colorado Springs for 2 weeks to run a session with a bunch of Space Force aligned people who I've talked to, but many of whom I've never met. I've never laid eyes on. I don't know who they are. I have a partner coming in to help us build out the management strategy for the Space Force. I didn't really know exactly how this was going to go. I just knew that we had set up this 2-week confab where we had to wear the masks and sit apart from each other and all of those things.
Yeah.
So I had all of this stress on me because the expectation was after we came out of this session, I was going to have a framework that we were going to very quickly build upon to build what became the guardian ideal for the U.S. Space Force, their talent management strategy. And I was like, I don't know how I'm going to do this. I'm actually going to be meeting and understanding the interpersonal dynamics with people because we've only at this point either been on camera or on phone.
Right.
And as I mentioned, some of these humans I'd never even seen on camera. So
right.
I'll talk to them, but I don't know who they are. We have to go through all that forming, norming, storming sort of thing before we start performing.
I know you, but I don't know you. It's really awkward. Yeah.
Yes. Now, fortunately, a few of the teammates I had known for a number of years from other assignments and that sort of thing. But the bulk of the people I never knew, and some of the partners, or I hadn't known, some of the partners that we brought in from outside industry to help us, I'd never met them, but they were supposed to help us facilitate all of this. So I just sort of reached that point where my mind was in a very dark black space. I was not sleeping well. I was having nightmares. I mean, I had just the challenges, and it goes to the earlier commentary that people who don't understand the rigors of a military environment just assume, well, the people who have it worse are the ones who are in combat zones. I'm not suggesting that those who are in direct combat aren't at the razor's edge, but you and I both know that the research that has been done over the past couple of decades actually points to the people in garrison are at a higher risk factor of suicide, mental illness, physical ailment, at a higher incident rate than those who are in the deployed environment because they don't have that same level of camaraderie that you have when you're in that crucible together. And so because I didn't have all of those tethering attachments, I was in a really bad spot. So anyway, my wife gets here, we go into the apartment, and I mean, Travis, I'm not afraid to tell you, I was in tears, and I was inconsolable for a couple of hours because of the pressure really got on me, and love the fact that my wife was sensitized enough to something's not right with Shawn.
Yeah.
I know he's leaving in like 48 hours, and he's going into this morass where he's shared with me he's really concerned about if this thing's going to go well or not, and the expectations that are levied on him. I need to go up there and see him. So she came up. We spent all that evening together, obviously all day Saturday. She took me to the airport on Sunday morning, and then I was gone for a couple of weeks. The moral of all of that to stay is I'm not self-flagellating, right? I'm not blaming myself for reaching a spot where things weren't great. But what didn't help is I ignored the things that I knew I was supposed to do. Here I am, supposed to be the smart senior leader in the Air Force, tapped to do this historic thing, yet the simple things I had simply forgotten how to do.
Yeah.
And so what that taught me is, fortunately, sometimes you have a breakthrough moment. That weekend for me was the breakthrough moment that I knew it's my responsibility, but I'm also not alone.
Yeah.
And it's okay to reach out and tell people that I'm having a hard time. And instead of just trying to be, sort of a broad shoulder, chest out, chin in, I could do this.
Yeah.
I needed to tell people around me, you think I have it all together because I have a smile on my face and my intonation's good when we're on the various calls and things. But the truth of the matter is I'm really struggling, and I needed to start having those conversations. Yeah. So it was really, go ahead.
I think the big takeaway from all that, not to summarize that, but is having that person that, I mean, a loyal and loving spouse is amazing. And, but for people who are single, it's having that person that can it's different. Something's off,
Yes.
Travis doesn't, I'm a man of few words in most things in life, so it's like, I'm kind of the same way. It's like, if I send you a text, it's like, oh, here's my soliloquy. It's a big word for me, for the day.
Yeah.
If I get Shakespearean on you, something's wrong. It's like, that's not
Right.
neat. If I start summarizing like my affection for you, it's like, whoa,
That's right.
does that person pick up on this is not normal? Or like they say, hope you're having a good day. It's like, okay, I can't remember what it was I was seeing the other day. I was reading, um, about, do you have that one person? Like
Yes.
everybody needs that one person for sure,
Mhm.
but you can do better if you have three, and like
Yeah.
life functions better if you have this very, very, very close niche. It doesn't be all guys or gals, or um doesn't be all military or non-military. It doesn't matter. Just, do you have this hub of people that will go through the battle with you, whatever the battle is, and then if you succeed or fail, will be there on the back end. And I think that's a
That's
very
right.
hard thing for people to grasp.
And the way that you described that, I really like what I told people after I had my clarity moment. Call it the clarity weekend if you'd like. I mean, it wasn't perfect, come Monday, but what I recognized is exactly that. I said I needed to make sure that I have accountability partners that are checking in with me, and then I know I can say anything I need to say to my wife, but there was fear in me, and she's living 3 hours from me. I have all of these things ongoing that she can intellectually understand, but she's not in the middle of it with me because I'm not coming home at the end of the day, and we're sitting across the dinner table and doing those kinds of things that you would typically do because of the nature of how we were living at that point in time. And so what I told people afterward is you got to have some accountability partners around
Mhm.
you, people that you're checking in with, they're checking in with you. How's that going? And really understanding that's okay. And there's no shame in telling people you're struggling. And so when I started to tell people on the staff what I was experiencing, because I knew they were stressed.
Oh yeah.
Some of those people, like I mentioned, some of them I'd known for years going into that. One of my teammates, we'd known each other for about 20 years at that point. So I knew that gentleman was stressed because we knew each other. So it was easier for me to check in with him. But I was giving him the patina that everything was fine with me.
Right.
So as much as he and I know one another, he was not picking up on what was going on because I was papering over and not giving any real clues. I was living in a bit of a
Mirage.
masked way, and and I told the team it was some number of weeks after that cathartic period when Beth came up. It was you guys need to know what's going on with me
Yeah.
because I'm doing you no good if I'm at the end of my rope all the time and I feel like I am just one small frayed piece of fabric away from this thing snapping.
Yeah.
You guys need to know what's going on with me. And that was really helpful. And as you know, as a leader, when you open up, and it's not like the old TMI, don't, too much information kind of thing.
Yeah.
It's really more of I'm not telling you this because I'm trying to be some sort of a hero here. And like, wow, look at him. How brave is he? No, I was actually a coward for not telling you what was actually
Yeah.
going on with me. And it's okay for me to tell you, look, some days you need to just walk in here. Now at this point, we're starting to be back in the office a
Hmm.
couple of days a week. It's okay to come to my office and tell me that you just need to tap out for an hour,
Yeah.
and we'll figure this out. The work's going to be there when you come back, or hey, I really need to take a day off here because I need the time for me to do what I need to against those four resilience pillars to
Yeah.
make sure I'm good. And as we all know, if we're not in that, I'll call it fighting form, we're not really all that helpful to the people around us.
Oh yeah. Absolutely. I remember
So
when
yeah,
I was in company command, which is obviously a completely different level of leadership, about leadership and people's people. And
that's right.
I uh I remember very well. So my son is severely autistic.
Okay.
He's 13, has a maturity level of about a 3-year old for
Hmm.
most times, and every now and then he crosses over as teenager, and whatever. But I remember he was, I forgot how old, about 8, I think is what he was, and when I was in command, and I would regularly try to talk to soldiers in company formations afterwards, or, that safety brief at the end of the week or whatever it was,
Yes. Hmm.
whenever I had a chance to get a small hub of them together, I would try to explain, like, hey, look, I get it. There's the average soldier, airman, doesn't matter, service member, cares
Right.
about two things: time and money, right?
Right.
When do I go home and how much am I getting paid? That's all we care about. It just changes at the level, right?
Right.
And I was like, but when you go home, I was like, there's like, we're pulling on you over here on formation on this day, this uniform. I was in the old guard. I'm like, we change uniforms like
Hmm.
20 times a day.
Yep.
When's this funeral, this funeral, this funeral, who's flag, who's this, and who's doing that. And I'm like, this is a highly dictated schedule
Hmm.
of predictability, but also stress. And then
Right.
that crosses over into training. And when are we going to the range? Probably never, because it's really hard to the old guard. And then you go home, you're like, okay, I have to commute. I live in Springfield, I live in Fairfax or whatever, and you're like,
Hmm.
all these things, and then you go home, and home has its own stresses. It doesn't matter what base you're
That's right.
at; it has its own stresses. You
Oh
have your
yeah.
kids, you have your spouse's work, if you have a spouse, or all these things, and then that translates over to home, wherever you're from. And your mom this, your dad that, your grandma's sick, your cousin's dog died. And I was like, you have all these things kind of hitting. And I was like, I get it. I was like, I promise y'all. And I was like, I made an effort, and I hope it translated. And I have some soldiers that call me and say, hey, that was great. You were honest about that. I was like, I have to go home to my 8-year-old who doesn't know how to feed himself. I have to go home to my son who I had to remove every electrical outlet in his bedroom and cover them with metal plates so he wouldn't kill himself. I had to do this to his window, all these things. So if he throws a tantrum, he doesn't hurt himself, you know? And I was like, I get it. You go home to stress. If there's anybody that understands it, I get it. So like I give y'all free reign to come to my office and say, sir, can I go home early? I was like, if you leaving at 1 o'clock to go take care of your kid who got threw up at school stops the old guard from working, I was like, we have failed. Like, and
Yeah.
I'll be the first to like take that ass chewing of like,
Hmm.
why are so and so? I'm like, get through up. If we don't
Right.
have somebody that we can, go to the bullpen and call on the lefty, it's like, then we have failed as an organization. And if
That's
the
right.
Army fails, then why are we here? And I've always argued that to any organization, if one person going home, maybe up to 10 in one day, stops the mission, it's like, we have all failed horribly, and
Right.
it's
We
not
have a
worth
much
it's
bigger
not worth it.
problem. That's right. And over time, the stigma around particularly mental health issues used to be, and you may remember this in the early part of your career, is like, you don't go over to mental health or behavioral health or
Oh
whatever
yeah,
we called it, right? We tried to paper it over with
fifth
different
floor OMAC.
words
Oh yeah,
to soften it. And well, if I go over there, does my
records.
leadership see it? Do they know it? Am I going to be embarrassed if I'm walking in the entrance? So we tried to say, well, you come around the back or whatever it
Oh
was.
yeah,
But then you're also thinking, well, depending on my job, does that mean I go on the do not arm list? Does
yep.
that mean my security clearance is temporarily
Oh yeah,
suspended? Does it mean
don't
that
deploy.
when my unit deploys, I can't go with them? And all my brothers and sisters are going, and then I'm stuck at home. So all of these stigma that are around that, I think that we collectively as the Department of Defense have gotten a lot better at that. I don't think we've fixed all of that yet, but we've come to an understanding where, no, actually, to your exact point, if we fail to take care of those things when we have the opportunity to do so at the early onset of some of those challenges, whatever they happen to be, we're going to be a much better fighting force for it.
Yeah,
And that doesn't mean that everybody's tapping out and then suddenly you create some sort of socialized experiment where everybody now has a mental health issue or everybody
right,
has a bum shoulder or what have you. I mean,
right.
you've been around
We're all
long
on
enough to
profile all of
know.
a sudden.
Yeah, I mean, we can flesh out the people who are who are abusing the profile system versus people who mentally weren't going to go over to behavioral health,
Yeah,
physically there's no way I'm going over there, even though my knee has been killing me for the past 3 weeks, because I know I've done something to it, because now I might need to have some sort of repair done, and then I'm tapped out and I can't deploy my
Hmm.
unit goes next. All of those things that we paper over. So even on the physical side of it, I recall as a relatively new colonel, I tore my left shoulder. And I was trying to figure out, well, how do I just get my PT test done so that I can kick that can down the road a little bit?
Hmm.
But instinctively, you already have torn muscle.
Yep.
It's probably not a great idea to do
Do PT
this.
tests. Yeah.
So I had a civilian leader impress upon me, basically, paraphrase, and he said, "You're an idiot. Go get that examined. Yes, you're going to be on a profile. You, you're not doing yourself any good or anyone else around you any good by not having that medically addressed." So when I got to my first O6 level command, I told the entire assembly, I said, "Look, I'm not afraid to tell you I'm a profile. Here's what happened. I tore my shoulder exercising. I'm getting prepared to have it surgically repaired, and it's okay. Like, I realize right now I'm
Yeah.
not deployable, but it's okay because I need to take care of this, because I'm not doing you any good if I'm not where I need to be, whether it's mentally or physically or what have you.
Yeah.
And it's okay for you to address those issues. And by the way, do so before you make it worse." And so removing that stigma, I think it's been a couple of years now where four-star General Minahan, who is the commander of Air Mobility Command out in Illinois, shared openly. And here's a four-star level senior leader in the Air
Yeah.
Force sharing openly that he had sought some mental health support
Yeah.
because of the things that he was dealing with at a particular period in his life and career, and how powerful it is when this, I mean, no kidding, warrior stands up and says, "Hey, it's okay. I have done this."
Yeah.
And so it's okay for you to address things that are going on in your life too. But I loved, again, what you said earlier. It's having a couple of accountability partners, that
Yep.
that that guy, gal, whoever it is, whether they live in the house with you, it's that plus.
Yeah.
Uh, it's good to have those check-ins. I have a civilian mentor who I've known since I was in high school, who he asks me, over my career, what was happening inside the Air Force, where I was stationed, what I was doing, whatever. We would have coffee when I would go home, which reminds me I'm overdue to schedule coffee with him. He he uh he would say, "That's all interesting to me, and I appreciate what you do, but how are you?
Yeah.
And what's really going on with you?"
Yeah.
And we could have those conversations. And again, because I've known him for the, almost 4 decades at this point,
Yeah.
um, I know I can tell him whatever's on my mind, and he's not judging me, and he's going to give me good advice, and he'll be the one to say, "Hey, knucklehead, go get your shoulder fixed," or "It's okay to go talk to somebody about
Yeah.
whatever you're dealing with. If you're really not sleeping and you're having nightmares, you probably ought to talk to somebody about that, and
Yeah.
not just try to contain that inside your vessel, as it were."
I think that's a valuable asset to have, is somebody that can say those words, because it's
Mhm.
hearing you vent, for lack of better words, anybody in is easy, but to
Yeah.
respond is a it's a skill, honestly. I think. I wanted to
Mhm.
hit, though. You mentioned something earlier about being deployed, regardless of your
Yeah.
job, um,
Yeah.
and kind of it's the easiest or best time in the service and all those things. And I didn't say it then, but I that hit me because I was like, it really isn't. I mean, for me, my 2006 deployment is without a doubt the greatest fun 5 6 months of my entire life. I mean, we were
Yeah.
literally living Call of Duty. It was awesome. We did 19 battalion level air assault missions. There's nothing like 46 helicopters lined up flying across the country. It's
Yeah.
awesome. It's awesome. But mentally thinking back on that, I was like, when you said that, I was like, it's not because I was getting to do the job that I love to do, that I just feel like I was kind of born to do. There's no other distractions. Like,
That's right.
it's amazing how, like, a little device, you know,
Hmm.
is the greatest way to stay and connect. with somebody, but it's also the easiest way to be disconnected.
That's
And
right.
how, I was deployed in Dubai, which I don't know if that even counts as deployment, but it was a lot of fun. It was really hot. But we're driving Ford Explorers, so I don't know. It's still debatable. But I read 13 books that year.
Yeah.
I was deployed for 9.5 months and read 13 books.
Yep.
I haven't read 13 books in my entire life before that combined, and I was in my 30s. And I was like,
Yeah.
what did I just do? And like, I had this time that, I was an officer and a little more mature than my enlisted
Sure.
days. But I think that's a common thing for a lot of people, is to look back at the good old days, as they say, is where things were just easier. You get up, you worked out, or in our case, our op tempo was so intense, the op tempo was the workout.
Yep.
115 degrees walking around streets of Baghdad's
Yeah.
that's PT,
Yeah.
and we'd walk, 30,000 steps if you count them back then with gear on, up and
Yes.
down the streets of Baghdad. So it was and then we come back and like, okay, let's play poker. I mean, with money. I mean, not with money, with money. And
Yeah.
um and have some fun, and everybody had their little their blankets, the little cave of blanket over the bunk
Yep.
beds,
Yep.
and just kind of like go in your little world and sleep or whatever. And it's like this, it was simple, and it was just eat,
Yes.
go do missions, eat, play poker, play Xbox, Guitar Hero's brand new thing, and
Yeah.
it's like this. I think that's and when we come home, and I always um I use this as an example because I was a part of the original the wrong way to do it crowd, because you have the Afghanistan start, you have the invasion of Iraq, and then you have us. I was in that next little tier of deployment cycles, and it was right after that was when the army at least put massive effort into this redeployment,
Yeah. The
like
reintegration. Yeah.
integration part. Because I was like,
Yep.
I
Hmm.
remember very well. I boarded a
Yep.
helicopter on a Monday night going into Tuesday. We flew
Hmm.
across somewhere in Iraq, landed, got in 3 firefights on between Tuesday and Wednesday. We came back Thursday night.
Yeah.
And I remember getting back and dumping my ammunition as we walked back into our compound on Fob Spiker.
Hmm.
And we got some rest, ate some food. And on Friday night, the next night, I'm on a C-130 going to Kuwait.
Yeah.
And we get there, Friday night going into Saturday. I have no idea what day it is, time. It's all subjective at that point. And then Sunday morning, we're boarding a charter plane going home. And we land at Fort
Yeah.
Bragg at the time, now Fort Liberty, obviously, Monday morning at like 8:30. And my wife at the time, I get home and she's like, "Why are you so grumpy?" I'm like, "I was getting shot at 4.5 days ago.
That's right.
like,
Yeah.
like I don't care where the couch is. I just want to sit here just for a minute." And like, there's a lot of noises that are freaking me out, because
Right.
you don't realize how quiet Baghdad is at nighttime. And
Yeah.
all you hear in Baghdad is generators, and every now and then a couple of shots in the distance. And it's shockingly peaceful.
Yeah.
And it was a really, I always look back at that being like, yeah, we probably should have had at least 3 more days, and
Yeah.
it all started after that. So it's interesting.
Well, and I appreciate that you brought that up. That the Department of Defense started to really understand the need to have that several day period when you're coming out, particularly for the combat troops like yourself, as you're coming out of theater, you need some decompression. You need a little bit of reorientation to,
Exactly.
you're about to go home. You've been gone for 6 months, 9 months, in some cases more than a year.
Yeah.
You need to think about all of the things that you just so aptly described. Like
Mhm.
there's sounds and noises and smells and things that you just haven't experienced, and you're coming out of this high intense situation where you've just been locked on. You're doing
Oh
your
yeah.
mission, you're being a good soldier, you're being a good wingman, whatever it is, and you need to have that reorientation. I went to look at that program for the Air Force folks, um, in I think it was 2011, maybe in 2010, when we were doing it outside of Ramstein, Germany, and I went to go take a look at that, and I thought, this is an amazing program, but it's so necessary for the explosive ordnance disposal airmen that were
Oh yeah.
coming home, our pararescue men, all of those folks that had been at the high intensity end of conflict. for the time that they were deployed, like you were, and really understanding we didn't do that when people came back from World War One, World War Two,
No.
Korea, Vietnam, or for that matter, the Gulf War.
Yeah.
And so think about all of the opportunities we missed. One of the things that I was very concerned about was when we started to disband those programs. It's one thing when we decided to start the responsible drawdown out of Iraq, and obviously we're no longer in Afghanistan. We still have footholds in various places. But I remember having this dialogue with some of the leaders I was working with. That I think it's too soon for us to start disassembling this program.
Yeah.
It's one thing to suggest that we should only do it when people are in the redeployment phase. It's another thing to then to take all that we learned in the years that we were running those programs and cast it off
Yeah.
instead of recognizing that some of the invisible wounds that we talk about, they're going to linger for years. And so how do we ensure that we still have some of those same programs available for people? And I think we're trying to do that. The nation has a chronic shortage of people that are mental health experts and that sort of thing. So we're fighting that a little bit. It's the same thing where when we were ramping up and we had a couple 100,000 people in theater on a routine basis, we thought about all of these things that we hadn't done for decades.
Right.
Like think about convoy operations. We hadn't done that since Vietnam,
Yeah.
but we were relearning things that we used to be really skilled at doing, and then we ramped it up. We do what we always do. We were very responsive. We had amazing people that figured it out. We promulgated that. We trained people. We got really good at doing convoy operations, bringing down the total number of issues that we're having with IEDs, all of those things.
Oh yeah.
And then we just put it on the shelf. And we said,
Yeah.
well, we're done with that. We're not doing convoy operations anywhere in the Central Command AOR anymore. And so we don't need to do this anymore. I'm thinking, to me, that's a combat tactic. So why
Yeah.
are we just going to put that away? Because I'm pretty sure at some point we're going to have to know how to do this again.
It's funny you say that is because, being on the Army side of it all is, I came in 03 and we wore BDUs back then, sleeves rolled up and all that. And every time you cross the fence line into the field, it was full camo on your face, and like we are just doing like what I thought like this is very Vietnamish, like, and I remember when the ACUs came out, like
Yep.
the roar from infantry especially, but the Army in general is like, because Velcro is real tactical. I'm like, you rolled up in a tank. If they didn't hear the, like, I promise you, the Velcro is not going to give away your position.
Right.
He's like, that was always the argument. This is not very tactical, and I'm like, we landed like 12 helicopters in their backyard. I'm pretty sure they know we're here. Which shockingly,
Right.
what's really really funny. It's a funny story about that. Is we did a time breach one time in Iraq. We had
Mhm.
6 houses. They all have these little courtyard gates that are super annoying, and we all had to shotgun blast and breach in, and we're looking
Yep.
for one person, and we just the signal saying that the phone we're looking for is in this one house, right? And it's somewhere in that region. So we're gonna hit all these houses, and we boom, 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 hit all three shingles. We all go in, breach it. Nobody's in the house. First floor empty, second floor empty, third floor is empty. It's a weird little like thing. We go to the roof. There's 16 people on the roof, out cold, like
Wow.
snoring. I'm like, what are we're worried about Velcro? Like, I just blew your door off with slugs
They're
and
still asleep.
and you're out cold. So it's I always laugh at that. I always connect those two. But I always laugh at like the transition from these uniforms and how people
Yeah.
push back. But I had a point with all that and I just derailed myself. Wow, my brain just stopped. This is what happens when you have massive head injuries from IEDs and stuff. You forget where you're going. But what was I saying?
I think you were talking about just the transition into various phases.
Yeah, but and how we go. Oh yeah, the camouflage in the face. So when we
Yeah.
went to ACUs, there was no camouflage in your face. We had no more camo,
Yeah.
and we did that for like 13, 14 years with that uniform, where we just this uniform camouflage doesn't look good with it, so we're just not going to do camouflage. And as soon as the new green uniform came out, I was like, I remember telling a buddy, I was like, I was in the Pentagon, or no, I was in the old guard. I was like, I give it a week, and the Army will post a picture on their Instagram or whatever with some dude wearing camouflage. I was
Yeah.
like, they're gonna bring it right back. Put the leaves in your hair. I was like, because we're gonna go revert back and do what you just said.
Yes.
Joe Petraeus wrote this amazing manual on how to do counterterrorism and all this
Yep.
stuff. And I was like, but we're gonna go back to the Vietnam thing of, well, this it's kind of the same way of fighting, but we're gonna do it with face paint and with leaves in our helmets.
Right.
And I'm like, we've been fighting in the desert for how many years? And I always
Yeah.
thought it was, I mean, granted, there's palm trees in Baghdad, but we don't really hide behind them. But it's
Well, I mean, CCD is different, right?
yeah,
In a sandy environment than if you're covered in foliage in a forest. But you're exactly right, is that
yeah,
we've learned so many of these lessons and then we just sort of chunk them away, go,
yeah,
well, that's not the nature of warfare anymore. And I'm reminded when you talked about Petraeus writing the tactical handbook on how to do some of these operations. It goes back so much further than that.
oh
The
yeah,
Marine Corps wrote the Small Wars Manual in 1898.
yeah.
So many of the same tactics that are employable and useful today, we're relearning lessons of 120 years ago, right?
So I have to show you this. You'll love this. So this is the Manual of non-commissioned officers and privates of the infantry, 1917.
I love it. Yeah.
Look at this. It's
That's
not even
great.
not even a finger width.
Right.
This is the greatest thing I've ever read. And as
Yeah.
far as you read it and you're like, it's so incredibly simple. And I was like, this,
Right.
today, the Army doctrine program, ADP 1 and 2, all those
Mhm.
things. And I'm like, little bitty manuals to, humongous binders. And
Yeah.
I always joke about being the Pentagon for a couple of years is
Yeah.
I've learned, excuse my French here, but it's like, no one reads shit. It's like, you're in
Oh,
the building and you're forced to read. You're forced, and you start going through this stuff. And you're
right.
like the NDA you mentioned. The TMTF for the Army, we
Hmm.
lived and breathed off the NDA 2019. That was like
Yeah. Oh,
that's what
100%. Yeah.
we functioned off of that
Yep.
document. And I
Yep.
remember reading that in depth as a
Hmm.
captain. And I'd be like, there's nobody else. There's no other captains in the Army that aren't in this building that have no any idea this even exists.
That's right.
And I was like, this is
Yeah.
how do you communicate? Because I remember talking about General McGee at the time.
Hmm.
We were having many discussions on like, we speak on behalf of the Army,
Yeah.
and so we have to be very careful with our words. Is that General McConville at the time, has given
Hmm.
us enormous authority to function and do our job and all these things, but we speak with his authority. And as the Army, because they want to get Facebook and Twitter. I'm like, no, we are not a rogue organization over here posting this is cool, you should do this. It's like we work
Right.
for him. And but within that was a enormous challenge to how do you tell every single officer coming up, every single captain in the Army that you have to take the GRE. It was like, how do you communicate that? Do we put it on
Right.
Twitter? That's not going to work. If we put it on Facebook, that's not
No.
going to work. Is that going to be? Do we do an Alarak? Because it doesn't. It's not all Army. So it's like this. It was a simple thing of like, yes, we're going to send them all an email. That's what the end result was, obviously. But how do you know they got it? How do we confirm these things and communicate? And you can do that with a career move, but also what we're talking about before of here's a resource, a safe resource
Yeah.
for mental health, and
That's
everything.
right.
So I think it's an enormous challenge I think for any branch. To the Army obviously being the largest one has a different challenge within that, but it's it's pretty unique. So, but well, Shawn,
So,
go ahead.
yeah. I was just going to say, I appreciate you said that because sometimes we get lost in the size and scope of the respective services. Space Force is less than 18,000 people, so it's a little easier for them. But for the rest of the services, I mean, you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of people, and they're globally distributed. And so we just assume I can put a message out, a notice to all airmen, or the various forums, and just assume that someone's going to get stuff.
Yeah.
Really quick story: when I was working for one of the assistant secretaries of the Air Force, we were actually in Balad in Iraq, and I've been to Fob Spiker a number of times. So it's not there anymore, but we we were having lunch with a bunch of young people, and one of the young guardsmen said, "Hey, I'm here on a vocal order. I don't even have orders to be here." And all of us were struggling with how fast you could cut orders
Yeah.
for reserve personnel, guard and reserve personnel. Long story made short, what happened was we were walking out of the dining facility, and he said, "Does that E4 not understand that I wrote a memo that said that what she experienced was not supposed to happen?" And he's a four-star political appointee. And I looked at him and said, "Sir, do you realize that if that got down to an echelon below probably the '06 colonel level, I'd be very surprised."
Yeah.
So I am not surprised that that young troop at the front end of our business has no idea what you're talking about. So you're exactly right. So going back to the broader point of all of this is it is a challenge, not one that we shouldn't attempt to resolve. How do you transmit messaging across these services because they're so vastly big, and we're going and going and going. Our mission never stops. We may not be in the middle of a big kinetic war, but we're pretty darn busy, right? Doing the
We're
things that we're
busier.
doing. And
I'll argue we're busier.
yeah, I think that's right, particularly as we've entered into this new era of great power competition. And then how do you share messaging with people that go take care of your four resilience pillars? There are resources available to you. Your leadership actually does care. There's individual roadblocks in
As
the way,
everything, there's always an oddity. Yeah.
right? But by and large, leadership cares about you at all levels, above and below echelon, and we really want to help you get what you need to make sure that you're fit for the fight that we need you to be in.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, we may recruit an individual, but we retain a family, and so we care about all of those things
Oh,
as
yeah.
well. And so how do we make sure that that messaging gets to where it needs to go? I used to just tell people you can't be everywhere all at once, but you definitely have to try more than one channel. If you put it on a Facebook or a Twitter or a Snapchat or whatever, that's not going to be enough. And you have to involve the people at the front end of the business
Yeah.
who actually are closest to the troops. The company commanders are the ones that are going to be closest to the rank and file. Get them engaged, and you'll probably solve this problem.
Yeah. I used to use that phrase, you can't be everywhere all at once. I used to add a second part to that. Said you can't be everywhere all at once, but you can be all there at once.
That's right. That's a
And I think
great statement. I love
it's
it.
a hard thing for people. If you're not mentally present and someone's talking to you, then you're a liability more than you are an asset.
Yeah,
So,
that's
but
great.
well, Sean, on that note, let's kind of wrap this up a little bit. But you got
Sure.
work to do. I don't. So, and
I do have a little bit of that, but it's
it's
all good.
it's been a great time having you on the show here, and we'll definitely we could probably talk for hours about the crossover of our careers. It's kind of
I'm sure.
fun, uniqueness and stuff. But for anybody out there listening, I couldn't agree with more with what you just said about your leadership actually does care, and if you need help in any way, form, or fashion, if long before suicide ideations even cross your brain, just recognizing that you're getting tired, and there's nothing wrong with saying, you know what, I need a break and take a knee for a second, and there's no shame in that, no matter what job you're doing. Well, I have my phone number, my personal cell phone is on my website. I will answer it. If it says cell phone, if it says toll, or what's it called, the 877 numbers, I don't answer those though. those are
Sure.
scams. So, but otherwise I will answer. So, and I'm sure Shawn would probably do the same. So, but
Good.
appreciate it. We'll see you on the next episode.
That sounds great.